And big day for the 49ers. They're holding a joint practice with the Tennessee Titans. And the first piece of news, I think Evan hit on the head, will be interesting. It'll be to find out who actually is participating in this joint practice. But we're throwing out there, after a couple weeks of training camp, are you more optimistic about this team or more pessimistic about this team? Do you not worry about what's going on in training camp, even the little, bruises and nicks and things like that are keeping guys out of practice? Or do you kind of come down on my side a little bit that I do think all this matters? I think this is a time to get on the same page. I think this is a time for guys to work together. And with so many guys out, it makes it more difficult to find some cohesiveness. And it seems like it's a little bit of a repeat of some years past with the injuries starting already. We know what happened last year. But, it might be obvious, but the reason it's obvious, Evan, I think, is because we're just into training camp and they're starting to feel the brunt of injuries again. And that brings a lot of concern to 49er fans.
Well, I think it's setting the stage for, how much did you believe in last year's team?
I mean, that's a great question.
Because that's what I think this training camp and preseason is setting up. It's setting up the question of how real last season was, with all the injuries they went through, with Kyle Shanahan looking like he did his best coaching job, Robert Saleh getting that defense on the same page, putting it all together in Philadelphia in the wild card round to win a road playoff game. How real was it? Because they still have seemingly all the same issues. It looks like guys are going down. They're not practicing. It's setting the stage for another potentially injury-ridden season. They're an older core. They have talent, but we're not sure how much they have left in the tank. They have a solid quarterback, but he might need some guys around him to be successful. Kyle Shanahan has his own issues, but he's still there. How real was last year? That, to me, is the question that this preseason is setting up. And that's why it's so hard to handicap this football team, because I want to believe in them. I want to be optimistic in some of the few young pieces, and I want to be optimistic that Trent and McCaffrey and Evans and Kittle, all these guys, Bosa, have stuff left in the tank. But the reality is, Steiny, we don't know. And they have to prove that this year yet again on the heels of a pretty miraculous 12-5 finish to last year.
Boy, when you say, what do I make of last year? I mean, that's a great question, because, and I'll tell you what I make of last year, is I'm not sure. I got to give them credit for winning games when they were hurt. But again, I'm looking at that schedule, and you can't tell me that they didn't benefit from that schedule. Okay, they had an easy schedule, and they took advantage of it. This year's schedule is going to be a little bit tougher. They're another year older, and if they're as banged up as last year, I don't think there's any doubt. If they're as banged up as last year, they're not going to win 12 games. I don't think. And it's a matter of then how many games. I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to see another year where it feels like it all depends on Kyle Shanahan. Because, look, we know Kyle Shanahan is a coach who can get his teams to overachieve at times if they don't have the talent. But that's not really going to get them anywhere. So you need the combination of Kyle Shanahan and good health so that you have all your playmakers. And if those two things come together, then I think they can be good. But I'm sitting here now in August thinking, it ain't happening. It's just they're not going to be healthy. And I get it. If Goo were here, he'd be like, Steiny, you don't know that. And you're right. I don't know that. But I also put stock into training camp, and I don't like what I'm seeing already, quite frankly.
Well, are they going to be as injury-ridden as they were last year? You would hope not. I mean, they literally lost guys for the season that are supposed to be back. But, Fred Warner's going to be back. Bosa's supposed to be back. Kittle looks like he's on track for an early season return. Has looked good at training camp for what it's worth. It's like they're going to get some dudes back, but even with that, it's hard for me to see them doing what they did last season. Like, in a way, that's what made last year so special, is because it was completely unforeseen. Every single week we'd come on here on a Victory Monday and it felt like there'd be a caveat. All right, they beat the Buccaneers. Well, actually, I think they lost that game, but all right, they win week 1 at Seattle, right? Biggest win of the season. You take down what would be the eventual Super Bowl champions. Brock Purdy's hurt. Next week, you go out and you win a game. Nick Bosa goes down. George Kittle's got a hamstring. Like, every single time the Niners got a win, it also felt like they took a loss off the field. And that's why this year it's like, was last season very paper tigerish? I don't know. Reading a lot of people, who have just been at training camp, both local and national, everyone seems to be optimistic about this team because they overcame it last year, what they're dealing with now. But you can't guarantee that they can do that again. And so that's why I think that there's some anxiety about this group of, well, is this the last ride? Is this the last chance for this core to make something happen? Are they really contenders? Are they pretenders? Everything's on the table for this 49ers team to where I could see them being a solid group that gets to the postseason and wins a game again. Or maybe it's like the Giants where the bottom just falls out completely from a team that's been kind of playing with fire for the last 365 days.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at last year's team and last year's season, I think it's here we go. It's relevant and it's not relevant. It's not relevant because it's a new season, and the big thing I'm looking at is last year's schedule, and I'm not looking at the team so much. I'm looking at the quarterbacks they faced. And this year, they are going to face better quarterbacks. I mean, last year, you could make a case. Trevor Lawrence, they lost to him. Matt Stafford, obviously, is a great quarterback. I put Baker Mayfield in there. C.J. Stroud beat him. Caleb Williams at the end of the year. But if you look at this year, they're going to get Stafford. They're going to get Bo Nix. They're going to get Dak Prescott. They're going to get Herbert. They're going to get Mahomes. They're going to get Hurts. So that, to me, is a completely different dynamic. They faced a lot of marginal quarterbacks last year. And I think the 49ers are a team that, obviously took advantage of that. This year, the quality of the opponent is going to be a step ahead. And I don't think they're going to be able to, if they have the injuries on their defense like they did last year, they're not going to win 12 games against this particular schedule with these particular quarterbacks. No, and that's why, it's interesting that the team they practiced today against is the team that took their defensive coordinator. And so maybe the most important guy outside of Shanahan is Raheem Morris. We just don't know it yet. But is that a good sign that, like people have been talking the last week, is Kyle Shanahan the most important part of this team? All right, is Raheem Morris the most important part of the defense? I don't think so. I think it's more about the players. But because of how many guys are not practicing or available, and you talk about the tightness and the strains and guys missing time, which by the way is happening more to the Niners than others. It's like at some point I can't look at this team and say, well, it's just injuries because it's football. They're an older team. And that's why if there are guys that I'm looking at to help uplift this group, it is the few young players they have that we're going to see out there. A lot of the guys that got to play last season. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. But Brock Purdy's got to do more than he ever has for this football team. He has to, and that includes staying on the field because he himself missed a lot of time last year. If Brock Purdy misses 8 games again this season, I don't think there's any way that they can overcome that because I do see this year being a lot different and a lot more difficult from a schedule standpoint. No doubt. And if I, again, 888-957-9570 is the number. 49er fans, if I asked you what the high point or what gives you the most optimism about training camp, and then what's your biggest concern about training camp? I'm interested. Do you worry about injuries more than the offensive and defensive lines? Or is the reason you worry about the offensive and defensive lines because you think they're going to they might not be able to stay healthy? You can make a case that even if they're relatively healthy, those are the two, position groups that worry you the most. But, I'm just wondering if 49er fans kind of see it like I do, that, I mean, it's just going to be all about health. And I don't like what I'm seeing early. Or are there limitations that this team has, even if Bosa gives you 15 games and Williams gives you 15 or 16 games and McCaffrey has a season that kind of resembles last year and Kittle, you assume he's going to be back and being George Kittle. I'm just worried about, I'm wondering how much is solely on, the age and the durability of this team, as opposed to if I told you right now, you know what? What if I told you right now they're going to be pretty healthy? They're going to be pretty healthy. I know it looks bad now, but they're going to be pretty healthy. Okay, so now what's their ceiling? I think even if they're healthy, it's going to be hard to get to 12 wins.
Yeah, I would have them closer to 12 than to 8 if they're healthy.
I would too.
I mean, I got to be honest. I think that the worry around this football team does just have to do with their injuries. But the problem is there's a lot of guys that have dealt with them. Even Bosa, who's 29 years old, is still relatively young, but he's dealt with multiple knee surgeries. McCaffrey is maybe older for a running back. Trent Williams is almost 40. If you can guarantee me health for this football team, Steiny, this team is a double-digit win football team. I don't doubt that. I know that they might be in the shadow of the Seahawks and the Rams. That's completely fair. But this is a very good football team. And the fact that they did what they did last year, especially in Philadelphia, proved that, because they didn't have a lot of talent on the field to begin with. But a couple of updates from the joint practice against the Titans. This is from Cam Edmond of the Bay Area News Group. Christian McCaffrey's not practicing for the second straight day. Did emerge from the weight room barefooted. No Nick Bosa against the Titans today, but Mike Evans is back from his quad strain. So Brock Purdy's going to get a chance to throw to Mike Evans against some actual competition.
Can I take it a guy like Trent Williams will be participating today? If they're veteran type of guys other than McCaffrey.
Why would you assume that?
Because I'm just wondering, that's all.
I mean, he's at camp. I think that's probably the biggest development when it comes to Trent
Williams. That's true. You know what? He doesn't. That's true. As long as he's in the vicinity.
I don't care what Trent Williams does.
All right, that's true. All right, this is Kyle Shanahan from the other day, yesterday, where he was basically asked, "Are this many injuries normal?"
It feels pretty normal, give or take 3. I think it does happen a number of times in camp. We also have a number of guys coming into camp that didn't go on PUP that we weren't trying to throw back in there right away. And that stuff's always frustrating in camp. That's why you sometimes want it a little bit longer. The thing that frustrates you the most is when you lose a guy. There's one guy like that right now, which we've had to grieve for a little bit, and then you got to figure out how to adjust and move on from it.
Well, I assume he's talking about Ricky Pearsall there, a guy who came into camp and they expected him to play, and now he doesn't. That's the other thing. Where are they at wide receiver right now? Evans is going to practice. That's good. Can they count on him for a full season? He played half a season last year. I think they're going to be walking a fine line this year, obviously. And I don't know. Is your biggest concern right now? Would it be Nick Bosa in terms of health?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. I think that's the guy, talked about in the first segment. If there's anybody that I'm worried about the most, it would be Bosa. And it's less about the knee soreness. It's a combination of a couple things. It is the knee soreness. It is the fact that he's had 2 ACL surgeries. And it's also the fact that even before he got hurt, he kind of been dwindling a bit. And I know he hasn't had as much health, but if you look at his numbers, he's still a very impactful player. He's still a top 5 to 10 edge rusher, but he's not the top 3 guy that he was at the peak of his powers. Like when he tore his ACL the first time back in 2020, he bounced back and was immediately one of the best defensive players in football, not just at his position. And the next year he won DPOY. Could he return to that level? Perhaps, but I'm worried that the best of Nick Bosa is behind him. And I think that is kind of where a lot of people are for these players is the best of Christian McCaffrey, is the best of Trent Williams, is the best of George Kittle, is the best of Mike Evans, is the best of Nick Bosa behind them. That's what the Niners, to me, are trying to prove this year, that that's not the case. And I think if there's one guy that has to prove it more than others, it's Nick Bosa.
888-957-9570 is the number. We're talking 49ers, where they are practicing right now against the Tennessee Titans. And Bosa is not on the field. Christian McCaffrey is in bare feet, but Mike Evans is practicing. But if I were to ask Niner fans, your biggest concern that you've seen over the last, 2 or 3 weeks since camp started, to me, Bosa stands by himself. And it's because he missed most of last year and because he's had 3 surgeries. So we're going to find out what he's got left and if he can get back to being the player that he was. Okay. That'll determine itself. The guy that worries me, but it's not just solely on him. It is Christian McCaffrey. And I want to focus less on, whether he's lost a step or whether he's not the guy he was 2 years ago. Because you know what? He's not the guy he was 2 years ago. And I'm not here to say McCaffrey's done, but in a way, Evan, I don't care if, he's lost a step or he hasn't lost a step. The reality is that last year he played every game and they ranked 30th. They ranked 30th in yards per rushing attempt last year. And if you look at the year McCaffrey had 2 years ago, which was kind of a signature year by him, think about this for a minute. McCaffrey had 250 less rushing yards last year than he did 2 years ago, but he had 40 more carries. And his yards per touch was 5.4 running the ball 2 years ago. Last year it was 3.9. So, we can talk about how he was able to overcome a workload, but in a way, so great. That's great. He overcame, an injury and had a big workload type of season. But, they didn't have a good season rushing the ball at all. And so if they, as a team, didn't run the ball well, I don't really care that McCaffrey was able to stay healthy, if you know what I mean. I'm not blaming him for anything, but the reality of the situation is he's probably not going to have any more years like he had 2 years ago. So how do you make him more efficient? I look at McCaffrey right now in a little way, kind of like a volume shooter in basketball, where it's taking him more carries. He gets more carries, but he's getting fewer yards. And so it's great that he can stay healthy, but they still have an overall problem with the running game that they've got to figure out. And that's not just McCaffrey. That's everybody who's going to run the football.
Yeah, I think it's all connected. They also didn't have a ton of weapons last year to draw attention away from McCaffrey, and that's where Mike Evans and what was supposed to be Ricky Pearsall were going to play a factor. But, they're already signing running backs. Naheem Hines is a guy that they just brought in. Who was the other guy they just signed? They brought him in for a workout. Zamir White. Blake Watson is a player they're working out, a running back. I think it's interesting that the skill position groups, by the time we get to week 1, they might be better than they were at the end of last season. I'm wondering how much is it still going to be about Christian McCaffrey, because another theme of this training camp is related to injury, but it's load management. They're load managing McCaffrey, and they're wise to do that. They should not be working him as hard as humanly possible. He's 30 years old. He just touched the ball more than he ever has, later in his career at least, and they got to make sure that he's on the field. My question is Christian McCaffrey still by far and away the most important part about this offense? Because if he is, I think they're going to run into trouble just due to, fatigue factor, his age, lack of production. I don't think he's getting any faster. He's still a really, really good player. He's a great running back. And God knows the Niners need him. But if they are as McCaffrey-centric as they were last year, I just think they're in for some trouble.
I agree wholeheartedly. Like, what if I said, in order for the 49ers to have a really good season, like McCaffrey can't have the year he had last year. And that's where I kind of think, we over the last few years, we've always, who's the 49ers' best offensive player, most important? And we all kind of agreed it was McCaffrey, at least 2-3 years ago. I now think it's Purdy. I think Purdy is more important than Christian McCaffrey because he's getting to the point of his career where, I don't want to say he's got to start doing more, but he's now essentially entering or in his prime. Okay, so he's going to ideally have some, his best years the next 3-4 years. McCaffrey, on the other hand, so I want Brock to become just a better overall distributor and playmaker. I just don't think you can ask that of McCaffrey anymore. You cannot go into this season thinking that he's going to do what he did last year in terms of touches. So how do they distribute the ball to other people? That's going to be up to Purdy. So to me, like Brock Purdy, not that it never was his team, but this is his team. He's more important than Kittle. He's more important than McCaffrey. He's more important than Mike Evans. And a lot of times we don't say that about a Kyle Shanahan quarterback, that everything revolves around him because that's what Kyle does best is he can spread the ball around and use different weapons.
Well, I think it's because the first time it's coming into focus. It's always been Jimmy G or, these bunch of random slingers where now it's Brock Purdy's. I know some people still have questions about him and how good you think he is doesn't really matter. He's the franchise guy. Like, this is year 5 for Brock Purdy. This is the year where everyone should be looking at him and saying, you're the man. Mike Evans, Stribling, whoever, McCaffrey, Kittle around you, Tonjes at the beginning of the year if you need it. Like, this is where it's your time. And last year he got hurt week 1. That can't happen this season for Brock Purdy. He's got to stay on the field. And to his credit, when he does, they win football games. I know he had a blip in 2024. Some of it was injury related. A lot of it was McCaffrey related. And that's why I think you bring up a really good point, Steiny. It's like in 2024, when McCaffrey went down, when they didn't have him for the majority of the year, it felt like they did not have much of a chance in a ton of those games. I'll ask you this. Do you feel like if the same thing happens this year, which based on McCaffrey's track record is a very real possibility of him missing games, do you think that Brock Purdy is better or equally equipped to handle that sort of scenario?
I got to believe he's better equipped now than he was a couple years ago, but that's kind of what I'm getting into. If I don't want to have a season where guys are getting hurt and it becomes all about, look at how Kyle's gotten this team to still be competitive with all the injuries, because that team's not going to go anywhere. The only way this team can go somewhere is if they're healthy and Kyle Shanahan is essentially at the top of his game.